WWE just confirmed devastating news: Seth Rollins has suffered a ligament fracture and is officially ruled out of SummerSlam 2025. Here's what we know. In this video, we break down the full injury update following last week's brutal WWE Raw match, the extent of Rollins' fracture, and what this means for the World Heavyweight Championship picture going forward. Is this the end of an era, or the start of a shocking return? What do you do when the man you've spent your career manipulating suddenly becomes the only person you can't afford to lose? That's the question that broke Paul Heyman. Not as a manager, not as the wise man of the bloodline, but as a man, fragile, undone, and for once, completely powerless. Because this isn't just about a wrestling injury. This is about shattered plans, a broken alliance, and a future that may never happen. And it began with a moment that seemed, at first, routine. A stiff knee, a fall, and then silence. But under the lights of Monday Night Raw, everything changed. Last week, in what should have been another hard-fought, electrifying main event, Seth Rollins collided with Gunther in a match WWE fans had begged for. A champion versus champion battle that promised to define the road to SummerSlam. But no one expected the silence that followed one brutal landing, when Rollins went down clutching his leg, his face contorted in a mixture of rage and fear. Not selling. Not acting. But broken. At ringside, Paul Heyman didn't flinch. At least, not at first. He stood still, arms crossed, stoic, the chess master always planning 2 moves ahead. He whispered something under his breath, perhaps another prophecy, another calculation. But what Heyman didn't know was that for once, fate had made its move. And it would checkmate them all. Because just 48 hours later, the medical report came in. Torn ligament. Severe structural damage. Seth Rollins. The architect, the visionary, the man Paul Heyman had handpicked to lead a new empire after Roman Reigns' departure, was out. Not for a week. Not for a promo cycle. But out of SummerSlam. Confirmed. Done. And the moment that news broke, something in Heyman cracked. Witnesses backstage described a scene unlike anything they'd ever seen. The man known for his calculated arrogance, the manipulator of champions, was found in a quiet corner of the backstage medical area, alone. His phone lay face down beside him. His hands trembled. One producer said he looked hollow, like a man whose entire foundation had just crumbled. Because in many ways, it had. You see, Paul Heyman had staked his legacy on this next chapter. He had carefully distanced himself from the bloodline's implosion. Quietly guided Seth Rollins into a leadership role, maneuvered Bronson Reed into a monster heel push, and whispered in the ears of the board to put stock in the new era. And at the center of that plan was SummerSlam. Seth Rollins versus Solo Sikoa. A battle not just for supremacy, but for redemption. For Roman Reigns' silence. For the betrayal that had turned the bloodline inside out. Now? Gone. Worse, the news didn't leak through WWE channels. It came straight from the hospital. Rollins' ligament injury was confirmed by his own team, and sources close to the superstar revealed the heartbreaking truth. He had insisted on walking out of Raw on his own, refusing a stretcher, because he knew. He knew the summer was over. He knew the dream had just slipped through his fingers. And Paul Heyman? He didn't deny it. He didn't spin it. Instead, he cried. Not in front of the cameras. Not during a promo. But alone, behind locked doors. Because for Heyman, this wasn't just a personal loss. It was a tactical disaster. Seth Rollins was more than just a partner. He was Heyman's second chance. The man who could validate his legacy beyond Roman Reigns. Beyond ECW. Beyond being the wise man to someone else's empire. Rollins was the future. And now, that future was splintered. One WWE staffer, who requested anonymity, said they saw Heyman speaking quietly with Triple H after the injury was confirmed. The conversation, they said, wasn't about PR. It was about time. Heyman was heard saying, "We don't have time to rebuild. Not now. Not this close." Triple H reportedly responded with a somber nod. But even the game couldn't fix what was broken. In the hours that followed, the WWE Universe erupted in speculation. What happens now? Is the match off? Will they replace Rollins? Can Cody Rhodes step in? Will Roman Reigns finally return and reclaim what he once left behind? But behind the noise, behind the memes and the fantasy booking, one truth quietly shattered the silence: Paul Heyman, the puppet master, was out of strings. He had tried to build a new bloodline, a new kingdom. And now, his king was wounded, the crown out of reach, and the board flipped. Because for all the power Heyman had wielded, he couldn't control fate. And fate had just taken Seth Rollins off the board. But this story isn't over. Because Paul Heyman doesn't quit. Not in war. Not in blood. And certainly not in betrayal. And if the look in his eyes meant anything as he walked out of that backstage hallway, head down, phone silent, shoulders slumped, it meant something is coming. A reckoning. The tears he shed were real. But make no mistake. Heyman's silence is never just silence. It's strategy. And whatever happens next, at SummerSlam or after, it won't be random. It will be vengeance. Planned. Precise. And biblical. Just like Heyman always intended. In the hours following the official confirmation of Seth Rollins' injury, a strange quiet spread across the WWE locker room, not the usual anxious energy that follows a major star's withdrawal, but something more somber, more shaken. Because this wasn't just about losing a headliner for SummerSlam. This was about the collapse of something bigger. Something Paul Heyman had been building brick by brick in the shadows ever since Roman Reigns vanished from the public eye. And now, with Rollins sidelined by a ligament fracture, it wasn't just the main event that crumbled, it was the empire Heyman had been trying to reconstruct. The fallout began almost immediately. Bronson Reed, the enforcer handpicked by Heyman to serve as a monster in Rollins' war against Solo Sikoa's new bloodline, was seen storming out of the Performance Center later that evening. Sources say Reed had been promised a marquee role at SummerSlam. Not just as muscle, but as the beginning of his own championship push. Now? He was in limbo, caught between loyalty and irrelevance. "They told me I was part of a movement," he allegedly muttered under his breath. "Now they're telling me to wait." But Reed wasn't the only one spiraling. Backstage producers scrambled to rewire the biggest event of the summer. Seth Rollins had been slotted not only for the main event but for multiple pre-taped segments that were meant to advance a longer-term feud with Solo, culminating in an eventual return match with Roman Reigns at Survivor Series. All of that, gone. And Paul Heyman? He didn't speak. He didn't tweet. He didn't cut a promo. He vanished. For nearly 72 hours, Paul Heyman's name disappeared from internal WWE call sheets. Production meetings that he was scheduled to attend went on without him. Agents who typically coordinated through Heyman's office were redirected to others. No press statements. No comments. Just silence. But those closest to Heyman knew what that meant. He was planning something. One WWE insider, who's worked with Heyman for over 2 decades, told us this: "Paul doesn't cry unless it's personal. And he doesn't go dark unless he's preparing to launch something nuclear." And that theory gained weight when someone spotted him at WWE's headquarters in Stamford. Not with creative, not in a suit, but alone, late at night, standing in front of a monitor room filled with archived footage. The segment he was watching? Roman Reigns' return at SummerSlam 2020. The night the tribal chief was born. Over and over. Rewind. Play. Rewind. Play. Was it nostalgia? Or was it a warning? Because if there's one thing Paul Heyman has mastered, it's the art of resurrection. He did it for Brock Lesnar. He did it for Roman Reigns. And now, with Seth Rollins gone, he might be preparing to do it again. But here's the difference: this time, the betrayal cut both ways. Because sources have confirmed what WWE has yet to say publicly, Paul Heyman begged Seth Rollins not to compete against Gunther last Monday on Raw. He knew Rollins wasn't at 100%. He knew the knee had been compromised from the previous week's beatdown by Solo and Tama Tonga. He told him, face to face, "Don't do this now. Not when we're so close." And Seth? He shrugged. "I'm not Roman," he said. "I don't run." Those words haunted Heyman. Not because they were disrespectful, but because they were true. Seth Rollins never ran. Not from injury, not from critics, not from chaos. And now, he couldn't walk. It broke something in Heyman, not just emotionally, but philosophically. Because Seth had done everything Roman didn't. He showed up. He fought through pain. He carried the company when the bloodline fell apart. He earned every moment of this rise. And it still ended in silence, on a stretcher, under the eyes of a stunned crowd and an empty throne. But as the wrestling world focused on recovery timelines and potential replacements, no one noticed what quietly changed behind the curtain. A memo was circulated to select WWE officials, prepare contingency creative for Roman Reigns. And at the bottom, a name was scrawled in ink. Not Triple H. Not Nick Khan. Paul Heyman. Was this a cry for help? A last-ditch effort to restore a plan shattered by injury? Or was it something else? Something darker? Because here's what the cameras didn't catch after Raw went off air: Roman Reigns' private jet landed in Newark, New Jersey, just hours after Seth's injury was confirmed. No press. No WWE entourage. Just a small team, a tinted SUV, and a man returning not for glory, but for war. He didn't speak to reporters. He didn't appear on WWE social media. But those who saw him at the airport say he was wearing the same expression he wore before WrestleMania 38, cold, unreadable, calculating. And one thing is certain: Roman Reigns doesn't show up unless the kingdom is broken. And now, it is. But perhaps the most painful irony of all, the piece that shattered Paul Heyman the most, is that Seth Rollins was never supposed to be part of this plan. Heyman's loyalty, for years, had been laser-focused on Roman. The tribal chief. The undisputed champion. But when Roman disappeared, when the bloodline fractured from within, Heyman saw in Seth something he never expected: redemption. Not just for WWE. For himself. He could rebuild what he helped destroy. He could guide someone not born into power, but someone who earned it. That's why this hurt. Not because the match was cancelled. Not because plans were ruined. But because, for once, Paul Heyman believed in something real. And it still wasn't enough. Now, as WWE moves forward, as SummerSlam is rewritten in real time, there's a new question gripping the company from the inside out: will Paul Heyman return to Roman Reigns? Or will he do something no one saw coming? Will he destroy what's left of the bloodline, from the inside? One thing is clear. This war isn't over. It's only just begun. And as Paul Heyman wipes his tears behind closed doors, one final truth remains: his silence may be mourning. But soon, it will become strategy. And when it does, no one, not Roman, not Seth, not Solo, will be safe. Not anymore. The morning after Seth Rollins' withdrawal from SummerSlam was officially announced, the WWE Universe awoke to silence from Roman Reigns. No statement. No appearance. No acknowledgement of the man who had once been his greatest rival, and now, unexpectedly, his ally. But that silence spoke louder than any promo. It wasn't just Roman avoiding publicity. It was a calculated absence. The same type of psychological warfare he once used to destroy Jey Uso, Cody Rhodes, and even Brock Lesnar. And deep inside Titan Towers, Paul Heyman knew exactly what it meant. Roman was watching. Not just the headlines. Not just the injuries. He was watching Paul. And he was waiting for the answer to a question he never dared ask aloud: would Heyman come crawling back? Because make no mistake, the fall of Seth Rollins wasn't just a medical tragedy. It was an opening. A vacancy in the very throne Heyman had once promised to rebuild in Roman's image. And with Rollins out, Solo Sikoa rising, and the bloodline fractured beyond recognition, this was Roman's moment to reclaim what was his. But he didn't show up. Not on SmackDown. Not on Raw. Not even in the shadows. Instead, he sent a message. A private video clip. 2 minutes long. Sent directly to Paul Heyman's phone. No words. No threats. Just footage. Roman Reigns, alone in a black room, dressed in a suit, his face unreadable. Behind him, a monitor playing a looping clip of Seth Rollins collapsing on Raw. Then, Roman stepped forward into the camera's frame. He placed the undisputed WWE Championship on the table. He looked into the lens. And he smirked. Cut to black. For Heyman, that message was more devastating than any insult. More humiliating than any exile. Because it said everything without saying a word. You left the table. And now look at what you tried to build. Look at what's left of your empire. But what Roman didn't count on was what came next. Because Paul Heyman, though shaken, didn't flinch. He didn't delete the message. He replayed it. Then he forwarded it to someone else. Bronson Reed. No words. No context. Just the footage. A few hours later, Reed's phone lit up again. This time, it was a name he hadn't seen since NXT. Jacob Fatu. The message was simple: the wise man still has a plan. And in that moment, something terrifying began to form. A new movement. A darker alignment. Because Paul Heyman had lost his king, but he still had pawns. And in wrestling, pawns don't stay pawns for long. Across the locker room, superstars began noticing Heyman having quiet, private conversations with names that had no connection to one another, at least, not publicly. Bronson Reed. Damian Priest. Carmelo Hayes. Jacob Fatu. Each met with Heyman separately. No smiles. No press. Just a brief moment in a dark hallway, and then they were gone. And then, the kicker. On Friday Night SmackDown, during the final segment of the show, Solo Sikoa and Tama Tonga stood in the ring, arrogant, laughing, mocking Seth Rollins for playing hero and dying for Heyman's fantasy. Then, the lights flickered. Not a power outage. Not a technical glitch. A deliberate signal. The Titantron lit up with a phrase not seen since the Shield's final run: believe in the vision. Only this time. The colors were black and red. And Paul Heyman's voice, distorted, layered, came through the arena speakers like a ghost. I built the table. I served the tribal chief. I gave him glory. And he exiled me. Static. I guided the visionary. I gave him the world. And fate took him from me. Silence. But what's coming next is not built for titles. Beat. It's built for revenge. Then it cut. No music. No closing signature. Just the image of Heyman standing in a stairwell, in the shadows, his tie undone, eyes sunken, speaking one final line: SummerSlam is still mine. And just like that, the narrative flipped. Heyman wasn't crawling back to Roman. He wasn't retreating into exile. He was orchestrating something far more dangerous. A new breed of rebellion. One not defined by heritage, championships, or family. But by those left behind. The exiled. The overlooked. The betrayed. And at the center of it all stood the man who had once managed the beast, anointed the tribal chief, and crowned the visionary. Now? He was done serving. He was ready to destroy. Insiders say that the plan Heyman is now executing, referred to internally as the Fall Protocol, has been in development since WrestleMania. A plan never meant to be used. Unless the system collapsed. Unless Roman abandoned him, and Seth fell. Both happened. Now the protocol is active. And at SummerSlam it will come to light. The card is being rewritten in secret. Backstage areas are locked down. Creative scripts are passed in sealed envelopes. Only a handful of officials know what match will replace Seth Rollins vs. Solo Sikoa. But one thing is confirmed, it's not a replacement match. It's a declaration of war. And it will be sanctioned by Paul Heyman himself. The man who once bowed before the tribal chief now prepares to burn the bloodline to the ground. And in that fire, build a kingdom of his own. But make no mistake. This isn't about vengeance alone. It's about survival. Because when all is said and done, Heyman knows one thing better than anyone: in WWE, loyalty is an illusion. And survival is a performance. One he's perfected. And now, the curtain rises. The question isn't whether Heyman will strike back. It's how hard. And who'll survive when he finally does. The night before SummerSlam, the city hosting WWE's biggest party of the summer was buzzing with the usual chaos: trucks unloading production gear, camera crews setting up lighting rigs, and superstars filtering in under the veil of secrecy. But there was something different in the air this time. An anxiety. A sense that something wasn't being said out loud. Because everyone knew the card was missing a main event. And no one, not the fans, not the press, not even most of the talent, knew what was going to close the show. But behind locked doors, in a dimly lit conference room in the arena's basement, Paul Heyman stood surrounded by three men. Not Roman Reigns. Not Seth Rollins. Not Solo Sikoa. But three men whose names had been whispered all week. Jacob Fatu. Bronson Reed. And a wild card. Shinsuke Nakamura. No one had seen this coming. Not because these men weren't dangerous. Not because they weren't ready. But because Heyman, for the first time in decades, had abandoned every formula he had ever used. This wasn't about blood. This wasn't about championship lineage. This was about chaos. Jacob Fatu paced the floor, a storm in human form. His loyalty to the bloodline had never been unquestioned, but his loyalty to Roman Reigns? That had been burned the day Roman walked out and left his family in flames. Bronson Reed stood like a tank, silent, arms crossed, still seething from the broken promises that came after Rollins' injury. And Nakamura? He leaned back in his chair, smiling faintly. He'd been overlooked. Forgotten. Treated like a placeholder. But Heyman saw him differently. He saw them all differently. Not as superstars. But as weapons. "I'm not here to make you kings," Heyman said, his voice hoarse and low. "I'm here to make you fire. You don't sit on thrones. You burn them down." That was the final strategy. The Fall Protocol wasn't about replacing Seth Rollins. It was about replacing the system. And when SummerSlam went live, with the crowd confused, the commentators stumbling through speculation, Paul Heyman emerged from the tunnel in total silence. No music. No pyro. Just Heyman in a black suit, tie loose, face pale. The crowd was dead silent, until he spoke into the mic. "The main event is not cancelled." The arena erupted. "But this is no ordinary match." He paused, blinking slowly. "This is punishment." And then the lights cut out. A blood-red glow filled the stadium. And out walked Jacob Fatu, Bronson Reed, and Shinsuke Nakamura. Three men. No team name. No Titantron graphics. Just fury. But who were they facing? Who was foolish, or brave enough, to accept a match without knowing the terms? And then, to the shock of everyone, Solo Sikoa's music hit. And as the arena lights dimmed, the screen flashed one final message: Fall Protocol, terminated. Heyman had gambled everything. And lost. But as the fans filed out, stunned by what they had witnessed, the commentary team said what everyone was thinking: Roman Reigns wasn't just back. He was reborn. Not as a tribal chief, but as a Kingslayer. And no one, not Seth, not Paul, not Solo, not even the WWE itself, was safe from what came next. The Monday Night Raw after SummerSlam wasn't promoted with flashy graphics or loud promises. No Tribal Chief Returns banner. No fallout from the main event. Just a single image released hours before airtime: Paul Heyman sitting alone in a darkened arena, his silhouette lit only by the faint glow of the Titantron. No caption. No statement. Just him. Waiting. And when the show opened, he was still there. No music. No announcers. Just a wide shot of Paul Heyman, his face pale, eyes red, sitting on a steel chair at the center of the ring like a man waiting for judgment. The crowd didn't know how to react. Cheers turned to murmurs. Murmurs turned to silence. And then, softly, trembling, Paul Heyman spoke. I believed in a vision, he paused, voice cracking. In a man who stood tall when the empire crumbled. In Seth Rollins. The crowd stirred, some cheered, others remained still. I believed that if I poured everything I had into one last plan, one last story, I could save what Roman Reigns destroyed when he walked away. His fingers clutched the mic tightly. But I was wrong. He swallowed hard, eyes darting toward the entrance ramp as if expecting someone, or something, to interrupt him. I didn't just lose a match at SummerSlam. I didn't just lose control. I lost everything. My vision. My loyalty. My legacy. He paused again, the silence deafening. And I don't know if I'll ever get it back. Then the crowd, slowly, began to chant. Seth. 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 But Paul Heyman closed his eyes. No, he whispered. Don't chant for him. Not yet. The camera zoomed in on his face, now trembling, soaked in sweat, lips pressed tight like a man holding back collapse. Because Seth Rollins is in a hospital bed right now. Unable to walk. Unable to fight. And it's my fault. Gasps filled the arena. Heyman's voice cracked again. I pushed him to fight. I told him he was our last hope. I didn't protect him. I used him. The chants faded. He stood slowly, his body shaking. And now, Roman Reigns is back. He looked into the hard camera, straight into the soul of the audience. But he didn't return to lead. He didn't return to restore the bloodline. His jaw tightened. He returned to destroy us all. And then, for the first time in years, Paul Heyman dropped the mic and walked away. No music. No fanfare. Just a broken man leaving behind the wreckage of every plan he ever made. But what happened next would change everything. Because later that night, after matches had played out, rivalries reignited, and titles defended, the screen cut to black. No cue. No transition. Just silence. And then, a hospital room. The camera was handheld. Grainy. Like it wasn't meant to be aired. Seth Rollins lay in a hospital bed, a brace around his knee, his face pale, his voice hoarse. I told you, he said softly, almost too quiet to hear. I told you I wouldn't run. He paused. Took a breath. And now? I can't. The footage showed his hand, trembling as it reached for the call button, then pulling away. I know what happened at SummerSlam, he whispered. I saw what Roman did. What Paul tried to build. He looked away from the camera, eyes glassy. You think this is over? A faint, bitter smile crossed his lips. It's not over. And then? He turned back toward the camera, eyes full of something not quite vengeance, not quite hope, but something raw. When I come back, he sat forward slightly, wincing with pain. I won't be your visionary. Beat. I'll be your reckoning. Cut to black. The crowd in the arena, watching this unfold live, erupted in stunned silence. And then roared. Because despite the injury, despite the betrayal, despite the chaos, Seth Rollins wasn't done. And neither was this war. But while the WWE Universe was still reeling, another screen flickered to life. This one, shrouded in red smoke, with a single figure seated on a throne not made of gold, but wrapped in black leather, surrounded by tribal engravings scorched into wood. Roman Reigns. The tribal chief no more. Now something else. Something darker. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowed, his voice like a whisper in a storm. Seth, he smirked. Still dreaming of thrones, even from a hospital bed. His fingers tapped the armrest. Let me be clear. I didn't come back for you. I didn't come back for Paul. I didn't come back for the bloodline. He stood slowly, every movement deliberate. I came back for the throne. He stepped forward into the smoke. Because you don't deserve to sit where I once ruled. You never did. A final stare into the lens. I will burn down everything, and everyone, until what's left is mine again. Cut. Silence. And Raw faded to black with no outro, no signature theme, just stunned faces, silent commentary, and a storm brewing. Because Seth Rollins is broken, but not beaten. Paul Heyman is shattered, but still calculating. Roman Reigns is back, but no longer bound by legacy. And SummerSlam? Was just the beginning. 3 nights after Raw faded into darkness, WWE issued a cryptic press release. No photos. No video. Just a message, a new order rises. That was it. No context. No superstar names. No cities or brands mentioned. And yet, by morning, the entire wrestling world was in chaos. Fans speculated wildly. Was it Roman's new stable? Was Seth Rollins forming something from his hospital bed? Or was this Heyman pulling one last trick from the ashes? But the truth was stranger than any prediction. Because the next Friday night SmackDown didn't open with Roman Reigns. It didn't open with Solo Sikoa or the Bloodline. It opened with a name no one had uttered in months. Dean Ambrose. Not Jon Moxley. Not AEW's Barbed Wire King. Dean Ambrose. A throwback. A resurrection. And as the screen filled with static and an old Shield-style graphic flashed in black and white, the lights dimmed, and the crowd went ballistic. The camera zoomed into the arena tunnel. And standing there, under a flickering spotlight, was a man in a black leather jacket, unshaven, hollow-eyed, and silent. He didn't say a word. He didn't smile. He just marched through the crowd like a ghost from a war that never ended. And the commentary team? Silent. Because no one saw this coming. Not just because Ambrose had been gone for years. But because Paul Heyman brought him back. Backstage, the whispers were already circling. A secret meeting held months ago in an undisclosed location. A handshake agreement never made official until Rollins was ruled out. And now? Now Paul Heyman had his final card. Not a replacement for Seth Rollins. But a reckoning for Roman Reigns. As Ambrose climbed into the ring, Paul Heyman appeared on the Titantron, looking disheveled, his suit wrinkled, tie undone, standing in a dark control room filled with surveillance monitors. You left me to rot, Heyman said softly. You both did. His eyes narrowed, locked on the camera. Roman Reigns abandoned everything. And Seth Rollins believed he could rebuild it without sacrifice. He leaned forward. But Dean. He's always known the cost. And then? Heyman smiled. I didn't bring him back to fight your war, Roman. I brought him back to end it. Back in the arena, Ambrose paced slowly, soaking in the shock, the noise, the tension. Then, without warning, Solo Sikoa's music hit. The enforcer walked out, flanked by Tama Tonga, fury in every step. The bloodline, or what was left of it, had come to confront this ghost. But Ambrose didn't wait. He slid out of the ring and charged up the ramp. No theatrics, no weapons, just fists. And in seconds, SmackDown descended into madness. Ambrose brawled with Solo like a man possessed, slamming him against LED boards and steel barricades. Tama Tonga jumped in, only to be intercepted by Bronson Reed, who stormed through the crowd like an avalanche. Jacob Fatu followed, limping but wild-eyed, swinging steel chairs and dragging Solo back down the ramp. It wasn't just a fight. It was a declaration. And by the time security swarmed the scene, dragging bodies apart and cutting to commercial, 2 words echoed across the arena like a war cry: "We're back." When the broadcast returned, Paul Heyman appeared once again, this time from a live backstage feed. "I gave the world a tribal chief. You broke him." He shook his head. "I gave the world a visionary. You shattered him." He stepped aside, revealing a shattered glass display case behind him, once holding Roman Reigns' golden gauntlet. "Now empty. I have nothing left to give," Heyman whispered. "Except vengeance." He turned to the camera. "And I won't rest until every last one of you understands what I've known all along." He slammed his hand on the desk. "Kings fall. Bloodlines break. But monsters?" He paused. "Monsters never die." The feed cut. And that was how SmackDown ended. Not with Roman Reigns holding a title. Not with Solo Sikoa claiming territory. But with Paul Heyman, humiliated, broken, reborn. Unveiling the last piece of his chessboard. Dean Ambrose. Not a savior. Not a leader. A bomb. Set to go off. Now, with Rollins out, Roman unstable, and Solo surrounded by wolves, WWE teeters on the edge of a total civil war. Because when Ambrose returns, he doesn't take sides. He burns everything. And somewhere in the distance, Seth Rollins is watching. From a hospital bed, knees wrapped in ice, fingers twitching in frustration. And maybe, just maybe, beginning to understand what Heyman meant when he whispered those final words before SummerSlam. War always comes home.